First flight of the orbital Discovery, and the shuttle has cleared the tower. Discovery's core computers now have primary control of critical vehicle functions.
Hello, welcome. All right, it is Monday movie night. We're trying out a new format, but before we talk about that, we need to introduce our newest lore master. So we are adding a third lore master to the team. This is my husband, Reed. Reed, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Reed.
That's all. That's all you're gonna. So, So, the whole point of the Lore Masters is that we love stories. That's why we do this. That's why we do these streams every week. And obviously, we don't focus just on books, but we focus on things like movies and games. And we have lots of other things in the works that we'll be focusing on. So, Reed, what do you love about stories, and what are some of your favorite stories?
I like the things that kind of hurt your brain. That are hard to wrap your mind around. Favorite stories to tell. I can't really. I don't know. I can't really pick like favorites. It's just like that one's good. That one's good. There's just too many to choose from.
So, Reed also loves stories, and so we're bringing him in. We're starting him off with Monday movie nights, which immediately next week, that's not going to be it, because he'll be out of town, and Andrew will be coming in and replacing the replacement that replaces him for a week, and then we'll swap out again. So, Reed will be doing movie Mondays with me for now until we start to... I know. Hey, Andrew, you want a break? And then... No, you don't get a break, but you'll get a break next Saturday, so it balances out, kind of, sort of. I'm sorry. I will be better.
A break is a break.
It's fine.
Day off is a day off. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll hook you up with a bucket. It's fine. It's fine. We'll balance it all out. So Reed will be replacing Andrew for a little while with Movie Mondays, and then we're gonna figure out some things and just kind of go from there. We're still workshopping exactly how Mondays are going to work out because we want to make this interesting and good for everybody. But new format today is that we've already watched today's movie. We watched it last night. And so now today, Mondays are going to be pure discussion and not watching the movie, and hopefully that will help with anyone who's not interested in just sitting and watching the movie with us, and we can just dive right into the discussion. So, as you see from the title, today's movie is Django Unchained, which I think this one already had been slated for, like, we're going to watch this offline and then bring it into a discussion either on YouTube or on the stream, so this is actually going, like, right into... This was a good first one for trying this new format and not watching on live. So, obviously, as always, whenever I don't get to pick the movies for Monday movie night because I don't watch movies, and I have watched the same 3 movies over and over again, and if I pick the movies for Monday movie night, it would just be all the Star Wars movies and Lord of the Rings, and you all would get sick of me. So, Reed has picked Django Unchained. So, Reed, why is it important that this movie be watched?
I mean, for one, it's a good movie. It was really well done. It has a lot of... It has a lot of things that were done very well. It has a good plot as well as some good comedy lines, but also like a lot of just kind of different things that make it a really good story overall. It's got like your classic love interest, some kind of cheesy joke type deals, kind of a few good shticks, but it also has this very unusual dramatic story that apparently it's too quiet.
Oops. You gotta talk louder.
I'm talking pretty loud. You're the
Talk
quiet
louder. Let me see if we can do something with the mic here. I'm gonna turn on the music too.
It's a very unusual story that, for the time that it's set in, no one would have expected.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's one of the things that's so great about it.
Mm-hmm. Andrew said, a deep look at the brutal history of racism and slavery in America with a large cathartic element of revenge and badassery. Yeah, that's kind of how I would sum it up.
That's pretty true.
Well, and that's kind of how that was what the really fun thing about this movie, or not fun is not the right word, but what I really appreciated about this movie when we were watching it is, first of all, I don't know how I didn't realize that it was a Quentin Tarantino movie, until, like, the end. And I feel like Andrew's gonna roast me for this too, because I'm pretty sure he's told me before that it was Quentin Tarantino, and I'm pretty sure you told me that it was Quentin Tarantino, and I just, like, deleted that information out of my brain. So, yeah, that's fair. 15 people exploded once. So I don't think I've seen a lot of Quentin Tarantino. That was the thing, was I was like, I've watched a lot of him, which now I have to, like, I'm going to check. Or actually not like this. I'm going to check though and see what I have seen that is Quentin Tarantino besides this, because I don't think I've seen a lot of his movies. So I didn't realize it was a Tarantino movie, and I totally lost my train of thought.
Yeah,
it's
also
gone.
Samuel Jackson.
It's on. Yeah, Samuel L. Jackson. Also the
yeah.
N-word. That was wildly uncomfortable for me, which, for obvious reasons, like, that word is meant to be uncomfortable, and it was intended to make you uncomfortable. Yeah, and Samuel L. Jackson saying the N-word. Yeah, it was the total point of, like,
what was even more
movie.
uncomfortable, though, was probably Leonardo DiCaprio saying the N-word.
So I was reading some stuff on IMDb about this earlier because I was looking for something, some other information, and there was a point during filming where Leonardo DiCaprio, like, he took a break and he was like, I cannot. He was having a really hard time with, like, the prolific use of racial slurs, and Samuel L. Jackson actually pulled him aside and he was like, this is a Tuesday afternoon for us, like, you can handle this. And it was eye-opening to think about it that way, because, like, this, like, probably very cathartic for a lot of the black people in this movie to be part of this project, because, like, it was the liberation of these two slaves, along with like all of these other side characters that also got liberated because of the actions of the two main characters. And to have this N-word be thrown out so much, it's meant to make you uncomfortable, and it's like there's kind of this like dual purpose that's going on, where there's this like campy, ridiculous, like everybody's dying and exploding and firing flaming balls of fire, but next to all of that like campy ridiculousness, there's this very compelling story that's happening where for the first time in his life, a white man is treating Django like he's a person, and like he is a fully formed human being, and not like a child or 3/5 of a person. And he not only is he treating him like a human being, he set him up for success by training him for a job, teaching him how to read, like giving him everything that he needed to succeed. Yeah, not just a person, but an equal. And they formed this almost brotherly relationship. And he set out not only to help him, he was like, you succeeding matters to me. And then you finding your wife and rescuing her matters to me. Like, he hated slavery and slave owners so much, he was willing to just say fuck you to everything to help this man. And you see this like contrast in the way that what is his name? I'm so bad with names.
Who?
The white guy, the German guy.
Dr. King?
Yeah, Dr. King, the way that in the story of Siegfried, yes, I will bring, we'll come back to that. But they're, like, such a contrast in the way that Dr. King versus treated Django and any other black characters versus how every other white person treated them. There was this, like, anytime that you saw a white person interacting with a slave, it was this, like, very demeaning, like treating them like a child or even treating them like an animal or a pet. And it was like a very disgustingly accurate portrayal of how like white people and slave owners in general treated slaves and black people back in that time. And unfortunately, it's kind of a treatment that continues to today in much more subtle ways. And I was actually thinking last night as we were watching this movie, this is a really appropriate movie right now because it's Black History Month. And so I was like, we probably should have done more of a theme this whole month, but here's this one. So, but what were some things that stood out to you, Reed, in this story and in the storytelling?
Some things that stood out. I really like the intro setup, kind of they kind of paint the picture of the doctor always being one step ahead, and he kind of takes Django under his wing, and he's like, here's how you can always be one step ahead of the other guy, and they'll never see it coming because they're dumb.
Well, they're so short-sighted too. Mm-hmm. Like even the scene where where they went and they killed those three brothers that he was hunting the bounty for, and they got mobbed later that night. Like, he was already prepared for that, and the mob was so short-sighted. And this is one of those humorous campy scenes that comes up because like the mob all like meets together like just a little ways away from where Django and the doctor are supposedly camping, and they all start bitching because like somebody's wife like cut holes in these bags for everybody to wear over their heads. Yeah, and then like they're all complaining because the holes aren't cut in the right place, and they're like everyone's like trying to make the holes bigger, and they're like, oh no, I ruined my bag. And it's just this like all they're worried about is their anonymity because they know what they're doing. They know they're doing something horrible. And then like just making sure that this guy dies. And they don't even consider that like they might have already foreseen that this was going to happen. Like, this was such a common thing. Like, the KKK was established well before this, or when was the KKK established? Hang on. But they like mobs like this, mob lynchings were definitely a thing.
Either way, the destruction of Django and the doctor.
1865, right at the end of World War II. Or now we're, oh my word, the Civil War. I have a brain, I promise. Right at the end of the Civil War. I was talking about World War II with the student earlier today. So, yes, the Civil War. Yes, I know. But so it was established at the end of the Civil War, but mob lynchings.
Please no.
No.
Please no.
No. Mob lynchings were already a thing. Like, this was, not uncommon. But it didn't occur. It was like the really funny part was like when they discovered that the bedrolls were fake. It didn't occur to any of them that this could be a trap because they were so focused on doing the thing that they were trying to do, which was to kill Django and the doctor. And that is what got them all killed. And, again, like Andrew mentioned in the chat earlier, the explosion with 15 people in it. But then that night is the same night that the doctor tells Django the story of Siegfried, which is because this is when he learns that Django has a wife. And so, Reed, why don't you recall, what is the story of Siegfried? And why was this important?
I'm assuming you caught a good portion of this, but so the story of Siegfried and Brunhilde is basically that Brunhilde is like the daughter of the god or whatever European mythology you wanna put. He says god. Pretty sure.
I think the mountain was. Okay, yeah, maybe it's a god.
But because this is a god punishment. Well, kind of.
He puts her.
Anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
She disobeys him, so he says, "Okay, well, I'm going to put you on top of this mountain, and then I'm going to." It was in a tower, on top of the mountain, and then surrounded by a ring of hellfire around the mountain, so that nobody could get there. Basically, to scare away anyone that would try to get her out, but basically that was the only way out was for someone to get her, so she was basically stuck. So it would only take someone that really cared and had both the motivation and the means to actually go and retrieve her, which is what happens pretty much right at the end of the movie. Everything is, they come up with this elaborate plan to go and get Brunhilde. They find out, well, first they come up with the elaborate plan to figure out where she is. Then they figure that out. And then come up with an even more elaborate plan to convince the owner to be able to basically to let them in and be all friendly and buddy-buddy until they can be like, hey, let's make some deals, talk some business, exchange some money, and then at the end of the day, also find a way to get Brunhilde into the deal and get out of there. It wouldn't be a good action movie if the plan didn't fall through and end in, lots of explosions and blood and gunfire and everything. So, like things do, he finds out that he's being played, which not really the biggest deal in the world to him. Like, they are willing to give up $12,000 for a slave that's worth a couple hundred, and so instead of now losing a $9,000 or $10,000 slave for 12, he's just keeping that and then making a 1,000% profit, more or less.
She was worth less than $300 to him.
Yeah.
Which was the whole thing.
So he made a huge profit off of her.
The Leonardo DiCaprio's character.
Yeah, Cotton Candy.
Calvin Candy. Cotton candy. Which the whole concept of the Candyland was like so, which again, it was meant to be just like so gross.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was exaggerated. Well,
Mhm.
yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
Some of it was probably not exaggerated, but...
Yeah.
Yeah, so once, so that falls through, the doctor gets killed in the process, and he's like, yeah, I couldn't resist shooting this guy, sorry, Django, it's on you now.
Mm-hmm.
He figures he's probably going to get killed, and he does. Django, takes out no less than 20 to 25 people before he eventually surrenders, and he's like, yeah, okay, I don't want to get Brumhilde killed because they have a gun to her head. So he, gets captured and becomes a slave again, even though that's not really how that's supposed to work, but who follows the laws?
Mm-hmm.
So he gets captured, and then it kind of cuts to what's assumed to be the next day, and he's upside down about to get castrated, and by Samuel L. Jackson's character, which is just like, what is this guy even doing? He's just
it wasn't Samuel L. Jackson's character. It was another character, but Samuel L. Jackson's character interrupted the castration.
You're right. Yeah. But still, that guy was a huge
traitor.
traitor.
Oh, no, yeah, that guy was, which there is like a whole thing about that with slaves, but I'll let you.
But Samuel L. Jackson does tend to play villains, so
mm-hmm.
not exclusively,
Okay.
but he does play a lot of villains, and he's
mm-hmm.
good at it.
Mm-hmm. What the rest?
Kind of lost my train of thought.
Oh, you were going for Rescue and Brunhilde.
Yeah. So, he's upside down, about to get castrated. Narrowly doesn't die there. In almost a stroke of luck. And then, he gets out and they're like, okay, well, we're going to do something worse to you and send you to go work in the mines until you basically fall apart and die, and then they're going to throw you in a hole. And then in the process on the way over there, he's been with the doctor for so long, he thinks he thinks up a plan and manages to pull it off, where he's like, hey, you guys are missing out on a bunch of money, and who's not going to listen to a bunch of money that's just sitting around? Like, hey, okay, wow, this is a legit bounty, let's go, maybe he's got something to it. And then he's like, okay, yeah, so you're telling us that you will give us, if we help you get over there, like, we're just going to get a bunch of money. And, of course, thinking with their wallets, they're like, okay, yeah. And they're like, all right, so I'm going to need a gun and a horse. He's like, yeah, okay, hey, give him your gun. He's like, okay, yeah, sure. Not even thinking, like, oh, maybe this guy's just going to shoot us as soon as we give him a gun. He already said he's not going to. So that he manages to pull the wool over their eyes real quick, and they get blinded by their greed.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of starts his climb up the mountain, where he kind of fights his way back into the house. And that, that's like up the mountain part, and then, the surrounded by getting through the hellfire, he's still got a lot of people to take care of. He's still not out of the woods yet.
But he does manage to rescue her, and of course, then uses like a flaming ball of fire once again. He uses like the last remnants of the dynamite that was being carried by the slave traders that were taking him to the mines too.
Oh yeah, he uses half of the dynamite to blow up one guy, and the other half of it to blow up an entire mansion.
Yeah, with the whole plantation, or the plantation house.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was also something I discovered recently, today, is that Django and Brunhilde are supposed to be the great-great-grandparents of the character Shaft in Quentin Tarantino's movie Shaft, which I have also not seen, which Andrew and Reed can both cringe and say, are you kidding me, and add it to the list.
I don't think I've seen that either.
Oh, well, there we go. Brunhilde von Shaft. It's there's a reference to it in the movie, because that's her last name.
Mm-hmm.
But Samuel L. Jackson's character he goes way back before Tarantino. Oh, okay. That one I did not know. Because Shaft is Isn't that one, it's supposed to be based on a true story? Or am I thinking of something else? But Samuel L. Jackson's character was really interesting to me because he represents like a part of the slave culture that was, I mean, all of the culture that was surrounding having slaves was extremely toxic, obviously. But there was this, it was kind of like it's a very good example of weaponizing black voices against their people. And there is a scene where Django and the Doctor are trying to come up with their plan to rescue Broomhilda and to do it very covertly so that, like, because they have this whole conversation where they say, you know, if you want to buy a farmer's horse, and you walk up to his door and knock on the door and say, "Hey, I want to buy your horse," like he's gonna be like, "What are you talking about? That's my horse." But if you walk up to him and give him a ridiculous offer that he can't refuse, like say buying his farm for way more than it's worth, that's a way that you can get into the back door and then get the horse. And so their whole plan, no, this is Patrick. Hi, Don. Their whole plan was to kind of come in with this ridiculous offer to, you know, offer $12,000 for one of his fighters, which this whole, like, one of his Mandingo fighters, which this whole Mandingo fighting culture is something I wasn't quite as familiar with before I watched this movie, but to see it all, like, kind of play out in this movie was very interesting. But so offer, like, $12,000 for one of his Mandingo fighters, and then, like, on the side, find a way to kind of also purchase Broomhilda, and then, of course, free her. And in order to execute this plan, Django has to do any of their bounty hunter plans, they've always been taking on these roles. They've become actors of a sort. And to take on this role, Django has to become this person that he says is worse than the head slave in a house. And they're Mandingos, and he has to take on this character, and he doesn't want to at first because he says these guys are lower than the head slave in a house, and those guys are fucking low. And then, like, within the very next couple of scenes, we meet a head slave, and it's Samuel L. Jackson's character, and you get to see exactly what he means, because this man is, and it's so sad too, because he's it's obviously he's a fully formed human being, a grown-ass man, and he has his entire life been infantilized and been taught that he's the master's favorite, that he is his right-hand man, and that he's kind of there as, like, the tattletale to tell the slaves and to, like, be in charge of them, and he's, like, kind of given this pedestal, but at the same time, it's, yeah, and that's $350,000 for a human being, which, okay, but he's given, like, this, like, he's put in this role and, like, told, you know, basically turned into this white man's pet. And you see this in the way that he interacts with Calvin Candy, the way that Calvin, like, he's allowed to have a little more lip and be sassier with Calvin Candy, because he's kind of the court jester in a way. And it's really, really fucking sad. I hate, like, Samuel L. Jackson played this character a little too perfectly, in my opinion. Like, it was just so well played, because it just hurts to see him doing this. And he actually ultimately becomes the one that betrays Django. Not that he was on Django's side in the first place.
He wasn't ever on Django's side.
He wasn't ever on Django's side, but he ultimately becomes the one who lets Calvin Candy in on the fact that Django knows Broomhilda. And he puts the pieces together that Django and the Doctor are here for Broomhilda, and they have no intention of actually buying the Mandingo fighter. And which is what becomes the catalyst for...
Well, they did, but that wasn't what they really wanted.
That wasn't what they were there, the main thing they were there for. But the thing that he said to Calvin Candy was like, do you really think they're going to buy this? They're here for her. because he asked him, like, okay, did he actually buy the Mandingo slave? And he was like, well, yeah, he just bought him. And he said, did he sign any papers? And that was kind of his.
So it wasn't about that. It was about, like, the money hadn't changed hands yet.
Yeah. So, but he was kind of, so his understanding of the plan was that they were never going to buy the slave, like, big Eskimo Joe.
Well,
the plan was still to buy Eskimo Joe. I'm saying his understanding of it wasn't. Like, he wasn't, he didn't know the whole thing.
He caught on that
they were there for
that
Brunhilde.
the whole plan ultimately was for Brunhilde.
Yes. But his...
Yeah.
So his impression of it was, though, that whether or not it was Joseph, his impression of it, or the impression that he gave Calvin Candy.
About Stephen?
Yes, Stephen, sorry. The impression that he gave Calvin Candy was that they were never going to buy the Mandingo slave. That was what he led him to believe.
That wasn't actually what I got from that.
Okay.
I thought it was more, he basically came to the realization, like, hey, this is what they ultimately want out of here, and you're going to give them this guy for $12,000. Why don't you just give him her for $12,000? Because that's what they're after.
Yeah. Well, and that was that was what
which is what he ended up doing.
Yes.
But that was kind of how I interpreted what Steven's character was saying.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Just different interpretations. Mm-hmm. But also, I agree that it was leading to, you can sell this really quote unquote worthless slave for the $12,000 instead of losing one of your best fighters. And to see, like,
because he even caught, because Calvin's like, no, that's ridiculous. Why would they do that? And Steven says, like, well, if they just walked up and said, hey, can I buy, I heard you have this slave, can I buy her for $300? What would you have said? He would have said, no, get out. Mm-hmm. And so the only way that they were going to make any progress is to blind him with his own greed.
Yeah. And that's what Stephen points out to Calvin Candy. He was like, see, you were blinded by your own greed. And, like, there's a moment where Calvin, he actually, like, appreciates what is happening to him. He's like, oh, this quick moment, like, you can kind of see where he's like, that's really good, but also, fuck you. Uh-huh. How dare you? Mm-hmm. And, the absolute rage and, like, the energy that Leonardo DiCaprio puts into this character is just, it's phenomenal. It was, like, sitting there watching it, and, like, there's been an ongoing internet meme for years about Leonardo DiCaprio not getting Oscars he deserves. This is an Oscar that he absolutely deserved. I know he finally got his Oscar, but...
That's not where I thought you were going with that when you said meme.
Oh, well, what did you think
of? You know that is, like, Leonardo DiCaprio's character in that movie is literally a meme. Keep talking.
Okay. But there's, like, this ongoing meme about, that Leo never gets the Oscars that he deserves, and just watching this and seeing how well he got into character and thinking, like, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's that character.
Yes. I am aware yes. I am aware of that meme. Wasn't, yeah.
Yeah.
But he 100% deserved this Oscar, because between, like, and Samuel L. Jackson as well, both of them together had to do something that I'm sure was so incredibly painful, and just so awful for them to play. Like, these characters are, like, just horrible characters, and, like, for good reason. Even, again, reading about the movie earlier today, Calvin Candy is the only character that Quentin Tarantino has ever created that he truly despises, and for good reason. This man is horrible. He's a slave trader. He is, like, the ultimate picture of what white slave traders were like, slave owners were like back in this time. Like, that they truly did not view their slaves as people. They were property. They were basically animals to them. And they talked down to them as if they were children or pets. And it was so just so very well done in how they portrayed them. But watching this movie, it's, you see these kinds of things, and when you watch movies like this where you see the portrayal of like what life was like in the South back in the 1800s, you always think like, how could people treat other people this way, or how could people act this way? And I'm so glad we don't treat people that way anymore. How could we ever, like, who would ever do this? But that's kind of the thing, is that this has continued in many ways. Sylvia's in the bookshelf. The treatment of the way that the, like, American system treats black people in general is essentially glorified slavery in so many ways. There's even a point where I can't remember where I made this comment in the movie, but it, like, specifically what was happening. But somebody says something about going north, and a couple of summers ago I read the book The Warmth of Other Suns, which is about the Great Migration, where basically all of these former slaves or descendants of former slaves started leaving the South and trying to go anywhere but the South. So north, west, the mid, like Central America, Central U.S. Oh my God. And they were all like, it was basically this great migration because it was really, really hard for them to find jobs in the South that actually paid them anything, or that weren't just another form of slave labor. And what they found was, when they went north and when they went west and when they went to the central U.S., they discovered that these people who had advocated for their freedom didn't think of them any more like people than the people who owned them. They just didn't like the fact that they were being treated as property. That was it. And it was really eye-opening for me to read these stories of individuals who were trying to fight for their own survival, trying to live, trying to get a job, and like stand on their own 2 feet, and be treated almost as poorly as they were in the South. And so you see this kind of throughout the movie, this like kind of hope that people have when they go free and they go north. And that was a very common hope that was held. And like when the Underground Railroad was being run, and when slaves were running away or being freed or like getting out of their situation, they thought if they went north, things would get better. And for many of them, it did. A lot of them went as far as Canada, which was really, I think, one of the best places for them to go. But life in many ways became harder because if they were running away or being set free because they were a black person in America, and because slavery was legal, some of them would get recaptured and re-enslaved, or some of them wouldn't be given jobs because people were afraid of what would be done to them if they employed a free black man. And even I was thinking of in the scene where Django gives himself up for Broomhilda, my first thought was, even if she gets away, like, that's going to be a nightmare for her. Like, as a black woman in 1858, like, this is not going to go well for her, even if she is free, which she was. She had, one of the doctor's final acts was to set her free. And to know that, like, this kind of prevailing attitude, like, still holds on today was, it was hard to think about as I was watching that, because, like I said, we watch these movies and we don't see ourselves in the movie. We see ourselves outside the movie and not as one of these characters. But, you know, if we were white people in the South back in that time, I certainly hope that we would have, you know, we would have been different. But this is the America that exists.
Yep. And at that time too, it was when you don't have a lot of ways to really, like, you can ask questions all you want, but when you don't really have another source of information to get answers from, it can be tricky to really make decisions sometimes. But the thing about going north was from the beginning, when the doctor pointed out the North Star to the rest of the slaves that were bought with Django. He decides that he wants to buy Django from the guys, and they say no. In a matter of speaking. And, well, he's going to make some money, and he needs this information from Django. So he, kills one of them and shoots the other guy's horse so it falls over and he can't get out. And then just lets the slaves do what they will, and says, you can either carry him to the nearest town and, continue to be slaves, or take care of him and run away. Also, by the way, that way's north, in case you were wondering.
And that was when I made the comment.
That's the part
That's okay.
That you said, like, somewhere in the movie they talked about going north.
Oh, right.
That was, like, the only time.
Oh, okay. Was it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I thought there was another time when they talked about going north, but...
They may have mentioned the north at another point.
Yeah. There was also a very subtle... Something they did very subtly in this movie that I kept waiting for, like, the entire movie, was even holding accountable the white female slave owners. Because there's kind of an ongoing misconception that these women were innocent in everything that they just kind of did what they were taught, and did what they were told, and they didn't really have any control over, like, the fact that they were married to slave owners, that they were raised in a slave owner's home, and that they weren't as bad as the men, which is entirely untrue. And I think we see that in Calvin Candy's sister.
How?
So, I mean,
How was she less bad, or how was she not less bad?
So,
not saying she was good.
We see this in the way that she interacts with her female slaves, and the way that she interacts, especially with Broomhilda, and the way she handles Broomhilda. So, there's a couple of scenes that I'm thinking of. The first one is when the doctor, when they arrived at Candyland, the doctor mentions to Calvin Candy, like, oh, you mentioned that you had a slave that speaks German. Well, I am German and I haven't been able to speak my mother tongue in, years, and I would love to be able to I would love to meet your slave and have her brought to me so that I can talk to someone in German. So of course, Calvin Candy, my esteemed guest, of course I will give you the female slave. And he immediately thinks that, he wants to sleep with her. And that's kind of how the doctor has to play this off. Like, oh, would you bring me the slave who speaks German? Excuse me. And so, they're sent to get Broomhilda from the hot box, which is a whole other thing. And one of the house slaves is sent, obviously, with them to get her ready. But then you see the maid, the head maid. I don't even know if she ever got a name.
She did. Pretty sure. I don't remember.
Okay. Well, that's cool.
Pretty sure she had a name.
We're both terrible with names.
It wasn't mentioned frequently enough.
Okay. But you see Broomhilda, the head maid, and then Calvin's sister, and they're bringing Broomhilda up to the doctor. And just the way that she interacts with Broomhilda, like she's a child, like a small child, and the way that she is dressed, and there's something in the interaction that you realize that, like, Calvin's sister is the one who dressed her, and the one who decided how she would be clothed and how her hair would be done. And when you look at Broomhilda in this scene, she is dressed very childlike, in a, like, both childlike and very maturely at the same time. Like, the way her dress is like this, it's actually a beautiful dress. It's like a very simple, off-the-shoulder blue dress, but then her hair is done in these loopy braids that are very childish. And that was very clearly like the work of, even if Calvin's sister did not touch Brunhilde, that was her idea. Like, it's very clear that she is in charge of what this woman looks like. And so there's that scene, and then there's another scene where we can go into the some of the science things that Calvin gets into, but he brings Brunhilde into he turns her around and has Stephen undo the back of her dress to show the doctor the scars that she has from being whipped. And the sister looks up at him, like she had left the room for a moment or she comes back, and she's like, why is she unbuttoned? I just got her like dressed. And it's like very much like she's talking about like a doll or a kid, or like I just got her ready, I just got her this certain way. Like,
she doesn't care about her indecency, just that her look is messed up that she put together. Yeah, and then you see this in little ways that Calvin's sister behaves. Like, it's very, very subtle, but again, excellent acting on this actress's part, where just even like the way that she looks at the slaves, or just micro interactions that she has with them, you can tell that she feels very superior, and she is just as bad as her brother. But they're in one of the final scenes, and this is kind of this is the long haul of where I was going with this, is, so a lot of time, going backwards to my original point, a lot of times we don't see where these white women are being held accountable, or we don't think we need to hold them accountable because, again, they're seen as innocent victims, when they were certainly not. And there's the very last person that Django kills, before he lights the dynamite and explodes the house in flames, is actually Calvin's sister. Like, she's standing there off to the side, and you can tell that she thinks she's getting off. Like, she's had to watch her brother die, all of these other men that she knows die. She's watched this man, Django, shoot up her entire house, and even when they walk in after Calvin's funeral, the house, the entry hall, is still just coated in blood. And when Django shows up and just starts shooting people again, she's standing off to the side, and you can tell she thinks she's gotten off. She thinks she's safe. She's going to make it out alive. Whatever this man is doing to everybody else, she's going to be okay. And then he starts to send the female slaves away, and he's like, go, run. But, before you go, say goodbye to her. And they turn and they say goodbye. And as they're saying goodbye, he shoots her in the head. And she just goes flying backwards, which was again... She goes flying, not back, she doesn't go flying backwards.
Is it sideways?
She goes flying to the left.
Yes. Well, backwards for her, though, because she was standing...
Yeah, she was kind of at an angle, but
yeah.
It was very funny how the trajectory that she goes flying is very drastically different from that of the bullet.
Yeah, and so she was less obviously aggressive, but just as dehumanizing, which is, what we miss when we look into what was really going on back then. And even there was actually something along with this that I noticed in the movie as well, is the myth of the happy slave. There's anytime, and it bothered me at first until I realized what Tarantino was doing, because I think it's the first plantation that they go to, you see all of these happy house slaves hanging out and smiling and having fun, and I was like, the fuck is this? And then I kept watching, and I was like, wait a minute, I see what you're doing. And it was because this was also a thing, and this is actually a pervasive thing that it continues today, that people think that most slaves were happy, and most slaves were content, and most slaves did not feel oppressed. And it shows that it's all a show, because even as you have these happy smiling slaves, in the background you have these horrific things going on, and people being beaten and bloodied, and even there's a part where where Django shoots when he shoots the third brother, and he's out in the field, and there's blood all over the cotton. The slaves don't even blink. They don't even blink. because they don't see who shoots him.
Yep.
And it's just another day on the plantation. And Tarantino puts little things in there like that where you see these slaves that look happy or look idyllic, or even there's one scene where I think it's Broomhilda is being dragged to be beaten, and as the camera is panning, like following her being dragged, somewhere behind them there's like just another slave just like swinging, just on a tree swing, just swinging. And they created this, which this was like true in the South at that time, is they would create this appearance that everybody was happy and everybody wanted to be there, which of course was absolutely not true. And you see little hints of, even in those slaves that are like playing happy, where they make a mistake and they flinch, or their master raises their voice a little bit and they freeze, and you can see the trauma responses in them, and it was just so very well done. And it's a good, I think it's a really good way of portraying both like the of like combining both like the campiness of the movie and also the just utter seriousness of it, because again, these like happy-go-lucky slaves just like hanging out in front of the plantation was extremely campy. And then you start watching everything, and like you start watching their body language and watching what happens when like little things happen, and you see them flinching, and you see the fear in their eyes and the way they rush to do something as soon as they are told, because they know exactly what will happen if they don't. Another scene like this is actually the Mandingo scene, where they go to find Calvin Candy, and there's those two men fighting. Do you remember the one slave that was like all dressed up in like the maid outfit? Do you know what I'm talking about?
You're talking about the one that answered the door?
Yeah.
Yeah, when she was all like happy and like speaking French, like, oh, please come in.
Yeah, and then she was like, you want to talk more about that scene?
That's what I remember from that scene.
Okay. But that was, Cora, where she like she's talking French, she's so happy, and she's got this big smile on her face, and then she goes and she like grabs a handful of candy, and she's like sitting there with it like in her lap of her super puffy skirt, and like the two Mandingo fighters are fighting, and it gets to the end of the fight where the one guy like wins against the other guy, and the other guy it's like a total KO, like he's down, he's not gonna fight anymore, but he's still alive. And then Calvin hands him a hammer and he says, finish him. And you see, and it's like, it happens just off camera, where you see like the knees and the legs and the feet where they're kneeling down, and you can see everyone else's feet that's sitting and watching in the background, and he hits the guy with the hammer, and the girl just like drops her candy, and it just slides all over the floor and lands like it surrounds the guy who's died and the man who's on top of him who just hit him with a hammer. And it's like that right there, I think, just shows the horrors that are behind the sickly sweet smiles. And that was exactly what he was going for there. And just being reminded that these happy stories that we hear, or the things that we are told that are like, everything was fine, they were fine, everyone was happy, they were protected, they fucking weren't. They did all of this.
They were literally forced to fight for their lives.
Yeah. And to see, like, even where, and like these Mandingo fights are fights to the death. And to see, like, that they were fighting, sorry.
They're fighting for
affirming
their lives.
what you said.
Yeah.
And it was really, like, in that fight where he, like, kind of basically disarms him, like, he punched him and the guy couldn't see anymore, and he was clearly down, he was clearly done. And you see the guy who won kind of sit back, like, he's like, okay, I'm finally done. And then Calvin hands him the hammer.
He didn't even do that, he threw it to him.
Yeah, he threw it out and was like,
threw
all right.
it on the ground.
Like, finish him.
Yeah, that scene is actually a nod to Mortal Kombat, where they say finish him at at the end, and you do a finisher move, much like that, where you destroy. I'm making a joke.
Okay,
but,
I was like, you cannot be serious
I
right
know,
now. That is not real.
I am making a joke about Mortal Kombat, but ironically, that is actually how the Mortal Kombat games are designed. Is, you know, it's like a classic 2D fighting game, but then kind of its special thing is it's known for its finishers, which when you have the opportunity to use a finisher, it'll say finish him on the screen, and then if you enter the moves correctly, it will do this absolutely grotesque like move on to the opponent that's like, this would kill a person like 7 ways if it was actually even physically possible to do.
Yeah. So it's like,
so it
kind
of ironically, yeah, it is kind of a
unintentional.
parallel. It's most likely unintentional, but it is there's kind of a parallel there.
But even with or without that that parallel, to see like just the intentionality of like what Tarantino does with his storytelling and everything. It's really, really cool to see, or cool. It's just, I can't think of the right word for this, but it's both eye-opening and stunning, I think is a good word for it. It's to see the way, like, because there were a couple of moments where I was like, this, like, where you're like, okay, this is supposed to be funny, but I don't want to laugh, because it's also really terrible, but I also, like, he's also trying to be funny, but it's like, you're uncomfortable as you laugh, because it's supposed to be, like, even going back to the scene where the guys are bitching about the eye holes in their socks, you're like, really we're gonna complain about this? And
I would absolutely complain about that.
if you were a part of a lynching mob and eye holes are wrong.
No, but like, here's the thing though, there are so many parallels you can make with this too, right? So like, you've got all these guys, right? And so you've got this like more charismatic guy, and he is able to convince all these guys, like, we didn't like what happened in our town, we're going to go do something about it and get them back. It's like, okay, well, how are we going to hide our faces? Why do you need to hide your face if you all know each other, you all know who each other are, and then you're going to go and kill 2 guys and no one's going to see you?
But it's the whole point. That's like the...
No, I mean the point is, like, in case, like, I mean, kind of, yeah, but it's also to, like, hide who you are, right? You know, to be, like, anonymous. Not that anyone's going to see you anyways. I mean, maybe, like, running out of town or whatever, but, the information comes out. You can see, like, clearly that the holes are, like, completely misaligned, and it's basically just a bunch of bags with 2 holes that are kind of eye distance apart. And then it's like, oh yeah, like, you know, one of the guy's wives did it. And it's just, like, classic Dependa.
That's where you were going. I was like, where is he going with this?
Yeah.
Like the classic, like...
That's what I was thinking, like...
Oh my...
somebody really tried to help their husband in this lynch, and they just didn't.
Totally
they just made it worse.
Which is honestly... Oh my word, having been a military spouse, yeah, that's... I actually remember there were times when you guys were deployed where, like, people would post things and be like, oh, I just want to help the guys, or I just want to do this for them, and everyone had to, like, scream no at them, like, what are you doing? Like, no, this will not help. And there were 2 things that I can think of, which actually I think relate to this really well, is there was always one person that was like, oh, I'm going to send my husband energy drinks, or I'm going to send him his favorite soda. And people would, like, they would, like, post their packages with all their cute little decorations, and there'd be, like, cans of soda in there, or someone would say, oh, I want to send my husband his favorite drink. And obviously not an alcoholic, because you can't, have alcohol on the boat, but Like, and everyone would tell them no. And so many times these women would be like, oh, I already did it.
The best part, though, I mean, with regards to drinks, like...
Well, the issue was they would explode.
I know, but the issue with that is most of those drink orders were coming from people just ordering them on the ship. Like, people were asking for that. Like, we had a guy in my division that had like a monthly subscription for a case of Monster.
Oh my god.
To the ship. And they usually were intact.
Yeah.
But, like, not everyone's were, and that was the problem.
Yeah.
There were so many beverage deliveries that, like, inevitably some of them are going to get, like, a couple of them are going to get smashed, but it's just going to ruin so many boxes.
Yeah, and that's what, like, these women, like, the other spouses would try to tell them. Well, and especially because, like, if you're ordering a case of something, it's being packaged to ship. If your wife puts a few cans of Monster in your package, that's a very different story.
Yeah.
And
even nothing was safe.
Yeah.
Even the most safely, like, well-packaged things didn't always come out well.
Yeah, there were a few things I sent you that, like, I was always really careful about double bagging everything and packaging them really well, and there was still
I think that did save one thing.
Yeah, there was a muffin thing.
Yeah, I think it was like one of those dry, like the microwave muffin things.
Yeah.
That I was able to salvage.
And because it was in it, because I double bagged it.
Bag, yeah. I think I had another bag another one that was in a bag that ended up opening.
Oof. That was probably not from me.
But,
because I double
bagged
everything.
I got a lot of mail.
Yeah.
But
the other one was like glitter and confetti.
One of my friends got he got like a Kraken's jersey, I think, in the mail. But it also had like the box had a bunch of snacks in it, and one of them was like those like cups of fruit, and it was like a cup of peaches. Like a cup of peaches like exploded into that box with the like Kraken's jersey in it. Yeah, or shirt. I think it was just a shirt, but he was able to get it clean though.
Well, yeah,
eventually, but
like, still, my word. Well, that like things like that where it's like you don't send liquids, or the other thing is like women like they would for like birthdays or holidays, they would send boxes filled with like glitter or confetti or just like a lot of like just trash that like stuff that was going to be trash. And it, like, they would also get told, why are you putting all of this in a package? It's going to explode everywhere.
The, like, packaging materials and, like, packaging peanuts and stuff was fine, because that was helpful. It wasn't ideal. Yeah. I mean, honestly, even though, like, packaging peanuts weren't ideal, because there's no real way to get rid of styrofoam on a ship. Yeah. It's literally, like, it's at least not well advertised, despite the fact that they sell, like, styrofoam cup of soup in the ship store.
Of course.
And yakisoba.
Well, that was also why I never, like, when I packaged things, I used, everything that I put in a package, I would pack it in a way that I didn't need to add things like packing peanuts and stuff. So it was all, like, reinforced by itself. Yeah. So, but that was why, because I, like, packing peanuts, like, there were also women that were just sending decorative shit. Because they're like, oh, look, it's cute! And I'm like, they're gonna have the worst time disposing of that. Like, are you fucking kidding me? Efficiency, woman!
Honestly, the confetti's not bad.
Yeah.
To get rid of.
Okay,
as long as, like, I mean, it might make a little bit of a mess, but it, like, the biggest thing was, like, the boxes and, like, the packaging from stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. But, like, the point there being just, like, the really try-hard dependent. That's, like, I'm gonna support my husband and his little lynch mob. Here you go, honey. I made 30. And, like, when they start complaining about it, the one guy whose wife made them, he's like, he gets really offended. He's like, he's like, how dare you, like, say this about my wife? Like, I'm gonna, like, basically, if you're gonna be a brat, I'm not gonna play with you anymore. And it's like, again, one of those really campy moments where you're like, you're kind of laughing because they're being absolutely ridiculous, but also, like, you're, like, horrified because it's a fucking lynch mob. Like, they're bitching about the eye holes in their sacks right before they go to, like, kill people for just existing. And it's just, like, the duality, the like, juxtaposition of those two things together is just insane.
And the movie is filled with stuff like that.
Yeah.
With, you know, kind of different aspects of different scenes, and that's really what makes it really good.
Yeah. Yeah, I think also, if you want to talk about the scene in the first town that they go to, where he's like...
Oh yeah, that's a good scene.
Yeah, yeah.
That's kind of part of what sets up the Doctor to look like he's always one step ahead, which he pretty much is, but it kind of is the beginning of showing that.
Yeah.
You know, he goes into a town and does something that he knows is going to, you know, get the town all riled up, and brings a black man into a bar, and he's like, hey, can we get some drinks? Which he's like, you know, but he's doing it, whatever. Not a big deal. But then the bartender, like, turns around and sees him, which this is also before the bar is even open, or saloon. And he turns around and he sees him, and he's like, whoa, 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 you get him out of here. You know, because they were racist back in that time, and that's how it was. So he's like, I'm going to go get the sheriff. Which, obviously, the Doctor, if you've seen the movie, you know that obviously the Doctor, at this point, this is all part of his plan. And that's why he says, you know, make sure it's the sheriff and not the marshal. Because the sheriff is actually a wanted criminal, ironically. So, you know, then he shoots the sheriff. Which also plays into the classic song, I Shot the Sheriff, which I don't know why they didn't play it, because that would have been hilarious. And then the whole town is all up in arms, and he's like, well, let's go back in for the marshal. And it's like, is he going to do that for the marshal too? They're going to kill him. Like, there's way too many people here. And then, you know, he explains this whole thing, like, is this the marshal? Like, are you going to shoot me if I walk out of here? Which is a very dicey move. He had like 100 people ready to shoot him. And it was very possible that someone was just going to shoot him anyways.
Yeah. Well, and I even thought that they were just going to sneak out the back. Like, that's what I thought the whole plan was, that they were going to stand there for like 20, like, in real time, obviously not movie time, for like 20 minutes. Like, yo, come out with your hands up, or we're going to go in there and shoot, and they're going to run in there and, like, see the two empty, like, beer glasses and some money on the table to pay for the beer. And then it was just, like, the funniest twist for him to come out there with his hands up, and, of course, very risky move like that, and to say, if you'll just give me 5, like, I'm so glad now, it's, like, we have the marshal, and, like, are you this U.S. Marshal? And he, like, says, this is, your sheriff's name is such and such, but he's actually this person, and he's a wanted criminal, and, like, did he get elected within the past 2 years? And everyone's like, all the townspeople are like, yeah. And then he explains that this man, he was a cattle rustler or something?
Yeah,
yeah.
I think so, yeah.
He was, yeah, so he
was stealing cattle.
He was cattle hustler, whatever. Words are hard. And so he'd been stealing cattle, and he was wanted dead or alive. And this is, like, the Doctor's whole shtick, is anytime, like, he's obviously he's a bounty hunter, and anytime he takes on a bounty, it's always, like, especially back then, the bounty was always dead or alive, and, which I'm is probably still the same for a bounty today, I don't know, I'm not a bounty hunter, but he always brings them in dead. Always. Like, that is his style. Like,
yeah, it's shoot first and ask questions later.
Yes.
But, like, here's the thing. How are you going to bring in a bounty alive?
You can't tie him up? I mean...
Literally how?
Be really strong and aggressive? I don't know.
Okay, but, like, here's the thing. He's got to bring those guys, like, so far.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm just amused by the fact that he sees them, he identifies them, he shoots them. Like, boom, boom, boom. No question. No, like, hey, if you come quietly.
It makes... It's so much more effort to take them alive, and then there's also the chance of them, like, trying to pull something funny and escaping.
Yeah.
And it's just literally not worth the risk.
Right. It's just amusing to me the way that he approaches it.
Yeah.
That he's just like, okay, all right. Mm-hmm. Like, doesn't even, like, there's no negotiation, there's no anything. It's just, You're the guy.
Yeah,
I
it's a
shoot the
job.
guy. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, but but I think the thing that's so amusing about it is he just appears to be this just mild-mannered, very nice German man, which, like, and he just straight up will walk up to people and shoot them in the head, and because it's his job to do that, and he's a bounty hunter. But I think that like even seeing that there's like kind of this concept too of like the people that seem like the bad guys are not always the bad guys, and the people that seem like the good guys are not always the good guys.
Mm-hmm.
Because
It's true.
which is like I think a very common like theme in any sort of like movie that doesn't have a black and white good and evil kind of situation going on. So anything beyond the typical childhood cartoon, which even then those aren't always black and white anymore, which I love. But like thinking back to like the South at that time, I'm sure Calvin Candy thought he was a very good man. Like, look at all these people I feed and house. Look at all of the work that I get done. Look at how productive my plantation is and all of the things that I do. But he was absolutely the worst character in the whole movie. And then you see this other character, the doctor, who, you know, on the outside, like, he walks up and he shoots first and asks questions later, and his whole job is to kill people. But the people that he goes after are not innocent. And it's very remarkable to me, like, the way that he so carefully, like, you only ever see the doctor shoot someone who is, like, guilty of very heinous crimes. Like, every single time that we see him, like, cashing in on a bounty or shooting someone, like, right off the bat, like, without it being a bounty. So, for example, like, the whole Candyland situation, it's always these people who have committed some really heinous crimes. Like, always people who have killed multitudes and people who have done these really horrible things. And in a way, like, he is going out and he is saying, like, justice is not being served, so I am going to enact justice. And even this is kind of the approach that he takes with not just Django, but all of the other slaves that he frees throughout this movie. Like, I wish it had occurred to me to count all of the slaves that he frees, because anytime he gets an opportunity, he makes sure that somebody else walks free. And this was actually, like, this character, him being a German immigrant, this was actually kind of a thing back then, because you mentioned, like, this feels like a very uncommon or unlikely story to happen back in the late 1850s. But this was actually something that was going on behind the scenes, where these, like, European immigrants were, like, they were leaving Europe, coming to America, and they were absolutely appalled at the fact that slavery was still going on, and the fact that these people were being treated as less than human. And it was disgusting to them. And so men like the doctor, they were very active in abolition and in freeing slaves, and in like ending slavery in general. And so to see him actively going around and doing everything that he could to free slaves, which actually goes back to, like, what we were saying before about how, like, he absolutely intended to buy Eskimo Joe. That was his whole intention. Like, the Steven just assumed they were going to do a bait and switch. But he 100% was going to buy Eskimo Joe, and he was going to free him. And that was his whole thing, was anytime he had an opportunity to purchase a slave and free them, he took it. And, like, he even would go out of his way to do this. And we see this, like, echo back to what the doctor spent his entire life doing and what was truly his focus, because, like, looking at who the doctor was, I think he was honestly an unlikely bounty hunter, because that wasn't really his main goal. Like, yes, he did the bounties and he was very good at it, but this is how he funded what he really wanted to do, which was free slaves. And you see that all throughout the movie, where every dollar that he earns is being used in some way to free slaves. And the fact that he's so, because I like there when they get found out by Calvin that that what they were actually up to, like they were really here for Broomhilda, and they really they weren't actually really there for Eskimo Joe, even though they were going to purchase him. Like the fact that he had the money, I don't know why I doubted him, but the fact that he had the money, like had a stack of money left over after they pulled it from his wallet, like just showed that he kept all of that money specifically so he would be able to bid as high as he could for these people. And then we see kind of a callback to that when Django frees himself from those slave traders that were taking him to the mine, and like he uses some of the dynamite to explode one, he shoots the other, and the other 3 slaves that were being taken with him, they were in that cage, and he leaves the cage open, and he just kind of nods at them, and then he rides away. Mm-hmm. And you see that he like is leaving freedom in his wake.
I was half expecting a similar scene to the very beginning when the doctor frees the slaves and says, you got 2 options to do whatever. Yeah. I was kind of expecting something similar to that, but then he just rides off, and I was like, I guess that works too.
Yeah. I think it's far more Django to be like that strong, silent, like, okay, you're free. And the doctor was very like, he loved a show. And like even like I think when he shoots the sheriff, he knows exactly what he's doing. He is putting on a show, and he's doing this for that show. So I think like that was really cool to see like that happening too, like where the doctor kind of even going back to something that was said in the chat before, treated Django as an equal and made damn well sure that he could succeed as a free man. Because that was something else that I think was also going on at the time, was that there was a lot of activism about freeing the slaves and not a lot about making sure that they could survive in a world that was actively working to make sure that they would not survive on their own. Like even just something as simple as teaching them how to read opened up so many doors for these men. And it even like Django learning how to read and knowing how to read and how to do math actually really helped him build a rapport with the men that he ended up exploding into oblivion. But that was how he got away from the guys who were taking him to the mines, was because he could read and do math. And there's so many good messages in this movie. And I think the biggest one that I personally took away from it is that you don't have to be a product of your time. I think a lot of times when we, there is absolutely, in a lot of circumstances, cases of historical snobbery where, if we, 100 years ago, we didn't have certain information that we have today, about, medical stuff or just cultural things, or there's a lot of information that we have learned simply because we've had more time in the modern age, and especially because we have far more access to information than anyone else ever has in human history. So generational historical snobbery is absolutely a thing, but I think we give it too much credit. I think when we look back at these times where people were being treated as less than human in some part ways, and I'm not just talking about slavery, but even just the aftermath of slavery. I'm focusing in on this part, partly because of Black History Month, and then also because of the themes of this movie, which are one of the themes is the freeing of slaves, and the mistreatment of Black people in America, not just back in the 1800s, but even today. That this, we can look back at this time and look back at the ways that people were using the Bible to justify slavery, and other social things to justify slavery, and even phrenology, which is a quack science to justify slavery. That's something that Colin Candy.
What is it?
Phrenology.
Oh, are you talking about the skull?
Yeah, the dimples. You want to talk about that? So what did he say about the?
Oh, it was just when after Calvin finds out their whole like actual plan, he goes on about this whole thing about how black people are actually more submissive, and that's like evident by these like skull dimples on the inside of your skull, which like doesn't make any freaking sense at all. But you know, it's back in that time there was still a lot to learn about the human body and really about like how the brain worked and stuff like that, which reminded me of another story for another time. And he goes on this whole spiel and like breaks down the skull and like, you know, just making up all this stuff, and pretty much just says that they are more inclined to just be passive and submissive, and pretty much says that they're more or less genetically designed to be slaves. It's pretty much what he thinks.
Yeah. And that was obviously like a pseudoscience that was used to actually justify enslaving people, and like those kinds of things like that existed, and that was a thing, and it was even like, so it was used to justify slavery. And so, but we can, if we as human beings can look at anything and say, if something is being used to build someone else, like another people group or another race or another culture, as inferior to ours, that should be an automatic no. That should be our sign that this is not, it's some sort of pseudoscience, if the information is being manipulated somehow, like, that this is not true. And this isn't how we should be using that information. And another thing that actually got slipped in there, which I was like, oh, that was good, is the myth that black people feel pain less. They can endure more.
I didn't catch that.
Yeah, that was, so when he says, like, he asks the doctor, like, oh, did you see her lashes? Because he assumed that, you know, the doctor had slept with her.
Yeah.
He said, you wouldn't believe it. It's such a marvel, like, what she can handle, because, you know, they're so much hardier than us, and they can handle more pain, and they can take more, and they feel less pain. And then that's when he undoes the back of her dress and turns her around, and he's like, look at all of this. And, you know, then when his sister steps in, she's like, I just dressed her, and all of that. But
so kind of to his point, if you go back to the Mandingo fighting, they would literally just pit the slaves against each other.
Yeah.
Which would result in only the strongest surviving, which meant that they were, if they were going to reproduce, only the strongest ones would be the most likely to produce, which is literally just breeding them to be stronger.
Right. But it perpetuates this myth that black people feel less pain. Which
that is not true.
Yeah.
But they basically were breeding them to be stronger, which I don't think they really had any good amount of knowledge on genetics yet.
Yeah.
But I think that if that had continued, I think an uprising was not far away, because they already outnumbered the white people by a lot. And then they also were basically bred and like exercised constantly. Yeah.
They were also kept in this like perpetual state of exhaustion too at the same time.
That's the controlling part.
Yeah, and that's even like there's in that scene where he talks about like, oh, why do you think like he even acknowledges, he's like, we're outnumbered. They're stronger than us. There's more of them.
And Steven talks about that.
Yeah. No, Calvin does, because when he brings up. Yeah. When he brings up like the whole.
He's talking
dimples
about
thing.
the guy who the skull was.
Yeah, Ben. Yeah. And he says, well, it's because of the dimples and they're more subservient, and so it was also, it's a call to this idea that they were less intelligent as well. Which the low intelligence and the like, they don't feel pain the same way that the rest of us do, are actually ideas that have like continued to this day and actually affect the way black children are treated in schools, and the way that black women are treated in hospitals, and even like black men as well. But there's a specific issue with black maternal death rates, where if you are a black woman, you are far more likely to die in childbirth or in the hospital after giving birth than a white woman, simply because you are given far less care and attention, and you are not taken as seriously when you're in pain or when something's going on, because they're seen as dramatic and like that they're tough and that they can deal with it. And it does a huge disservice to them, because it, like that's how we're like losing moms, and that's how we're losing even children. And then when we look at our school systems, when we say like, oh, but they can't comprehend things as well as us, or they're not as intelligent as like other people, that then kind of turns into this bias that is like placed on these black children, where they are not believed that they can succeed or achieve the same way their white peers can, and so they're given fewer opportunities, and they're given less help, and they're not just not being treated the same way that their white peers are. And this is kind of the way that when we talk about systemic racism, this is what we're talking about, because it's these ideas that were started well before the Civil War, that were going on for hundreds of years, that have persisted to this day and have been perpetuated into modern society. And even and now like we're going like super far off the beaten path here, but even like when we talk about like how the KKK was established in 1865, which was the end of the Civil War. I'm not going to get that war wrong again. It was the end of the Civil War. When we talk about things like the 13th Amendment, which is the amendment that established the prison system, this was all in an attempt, like from the very moment that slavery was made illegal in America, slave owners began working night and day to be able to keep their slaves and to keep the slavery system. And along with the 13th Amendment, there was, I alluded to this earlier when I was talking about the book, The Worth of Other Sons. There was a kind of an ongoing system in the South with agriculture. So obviously agriculture, like specifically the cotton industry, was very big in the South, was a really central to like the vast majority of slave owners in the South had cotton fields, and that was why they had the slaves, because
it was very arduous labor.
Yeah, and it's very delicate work, and until certain modern inventions were made, cotton was handpicked, and I think in some areas it still is. And
you had to remove the seeds by hand.
Mm-hmm. Like everything was done by hand, and so the best way that they could do that they thought they could do that, was through slave labor, because it was 16-hour days, and no person, well, I'm not going to say no person because I have you, and then I'm pretty sure Andrew's still watching, so I was going to say something like no sane person is going to work a 16-hour day, and both of you would have roasted me to hell. But you hire someone, and you have to pay that person 16 hours worth of wages. And so they utilized slave labor here so that they could earn more profits, and they obviously didn't have to pay their employees because they were employees. And so that was the economy was actually a very big reason why Southern slave owners argued against abolition, was because it was, which sounds so familiar, this whole "but my economy" argument is not new. And they, so what ended up happening after slavery was abolished, slave owners, with their now former slaves, implemented this system where they were like, oh, if you work for me, I'll give you room and board, and then I'll also pay you a little bit of money. And so part of their wages were the fact that they had a place to live and food to eat. And then they would also get paid money, but then they also created this kind of catch-22 system where they had to keep, and I don't remember the exact details on how this worked because it's been a couple of years since I read the book, but they basically set up this system where these people were in perpetual debt.
Mm-hmm.
Where if you wanted, like, anything, like, better than just, like, your basic lodgings and food, like, you had to pay for that. Or if you made a mistake when you were working and, like, broke something or lost something or didn't... Oh, that's what it was. You had to meet a certain quota of cotton in order to get paid. And if you didn't make enough, you owed the master money. And so that was how they kind of perpetuated the slave labor, because then it ended in these people still weren't getting paid. Because these quotas were impossible to reach. Like, it was like people were, like, urinating in their cotton bags to make weight for their cotton that they were picking. And so, like, and there was that, and then the 13th Amendment, which is the establishment of the prison system, which is, like, that's a whole other conversation for another stream. All of these things that people did immediately to turn around and just try and keep their slaves. And this is where systemic racism is coming in, because and I've had these conversations before where people, like, where I would try to explain to people, like, okay, when these slaves were freed, they were not given the opportunities to succeed, and people would say, well, why didn't they just get another job? And so many people tried that, and the Great Migration shows that hundreds of thousands of former slaves tried that. And they would get, like, they wouldn't get hired, or they would get paid lower wages than their white peers, or they would, like, be rejected in city after city after city. Or, which I think one that Andrew and I have brought up before, is that they would crowd black families out of white neighborhoods. And, or if a black family moved into a white neighborhood, suddenly they'd start leaving. Or they would only sell the really run down houses to black families. And it's like, this whole thing has been perpetuating since well before the Civil War. And so going back to, I think, something I said earlier about, like, we watch these movies and we think that, like, we're not one of them anymore because we live in a modern society. And I think this is honestly where the historical and generational snobbery lies, and that we think that we're better. That we think that, oh, well, because we don't enslave people, or we don't, overtly, like, look down on people that have a different skin color than us, that we're okay. But anytime we engage in and allow systemic racism to continue and don't stand up and speak out against that, like, we are no better than they are. And it's, I don't know if that was Quentin Tarantino's point in the movie, but to see all of this happen and to see the things that, like, myths and things that are perpetuated even to this day, and the way that white people treat black people to this day, just less overtly, to see that echoed and to see the history behind it. And obviously not every little thing was historically accurate because it's a Quentin Tarantino movie, but to see the echoes of history in that movie was just, I think, very eye-opening, and I think what makes this movie so important. But what about you? Like, what was something you think that, like, you drew from this movie that you felt was really important to know?
I think really just kind of what Andrew said is a hard look on, like, racism in the past and kind of where we came from. Like, that type of society is essentially the foundation for our current society. Like, we don't, I think as a society we don't agree with a lot of the things that were that way, but that is what our society is built upon. And despite the fact that frequently, I think we were talking about this, like, in a recent stream, people are often afraid of change, but also don't like things the way that they are now. Like, everybody has a way that they want things to be different, but it also doesn't want things to change because they're used to how it is. And change is very difficult to do, especially over, like, the mentality of a society, where, like you were saying, just because a slave was free doesn't change the mentality of so much of society where they are still a lesser person. It's like, well, okay, we're not allowed to have quote unquote slaves anymore. We'll just not pay them as much and basically still force them to do all the same things. They just have to use different tactics. And like it's something like that is not, you can't solve a society mentality problem overnight. But one thing, kind of off topic from the question that you asked, something that I did kind of think about when he was like taking in the bounties and stuff is like, how did they verify who it was? It
right?
could have been anyone.
Right? Like, I thought about that too, actually. Like, how do we know that this is the guy?
And he's got all this paperwork, and he's like, I've got this paperwork if you want to see if it's legit. Like, I know they had, like, stamps and seals and stuff like that, but, like, not everyone was going to be familiar with all of them. Like...
And not everyone had a form of identification.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like, the, well, which actually, I think, was even part of the way that like sometimes slavery was perpetuated, is if like you didn't have the right kind of papers on you, like as a black person who was free, if you didn't always carry the right kind of papers with you, they could accuse you of being a runaway slave and being illegally walking around. But yeah, with the with that, like it actually made me think of Django's first bounty, where he kills the guy in front of his son. And I kept thinking, like, how do we know that was the guy, that was the stagecoach robber? And even, like, because you see where Django hesitates, and he's like, are we sure that this is the guy? Or we should, like, look at what he's doing now. He's got his farm, and he's got a kid and everything, and he's like, but he did this thing, and we're doing justice now. And, it was, yeah, I thought about that too. Like, how do we know that this is the person? And even when he was like saying like, oh, your sheriff is actually so and so, and he did all these things, and he hands the marshal the paper. And
everyone just in that time period, you had to be kind of trusting of everything.
Yeah.
To some extent.
Yeah, which is kind of ironic,
like,
considering
the doctor had a story that seemed like it made sense, and it aligned with like the timeline of the sheriff being hired, and they're like, well, can't argue with that logic, good enough for me, I'm gonna go back to business now.
See ya. Yeah.
And it's just like, they didn't have any way to argue it or prove it either way.
Yeah. Yeah, they just kind of had to trust that he was saying the right thing. Which I think part of it too, especially with if we're talking about the doctor specifically, I think there were two things that really, like, kind of went in his favor. One was his confidence. Like, he would come in there, like, you don't shoot a man in front of his entire town without knowing exactly what you're doing. Or it being absolutely insane. So confidence was one thing, and then I think the fact that he did not fit the part of a bounty hunter or someone who was just going to shoot someone in broad daylight. I think those two things together very much helped his situation there. But yeah, I did think about that too.
Well, also, not something that's not super... I mean, they do basically kind of mention it at one point, but they don't say it a lot. Once he tells that story, it kind of scares everyone.
Yeah.
Because now, if he's right, and somebody shoots him, they're gonna die. Because that's actual murder of a government official.
Yeah. But if he's wrong...
Well, they're still alive, so...
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
It's just the sheriff that's dead.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But yeah, I did think about it because it was like, oh man. Well, and even like just thinking about like the mid 1800s, I like that we kind of went to like the movie took us to a lot of different kinds of places, because I don't know if this is just my brain, but I tend to like kind of compartmentalize things a lot. And so growing up, I read a lot of like the Little House on the Prairie books, and I was really interested in like the Wild West kind of stuff. And that was like a very mild interest, but like I was really into Little House on the Prairie for a little while. my mom, when we were being homeschooled, she would like read a couple chapters from a book to us every morning. And Little House on the Prairie, their Little House on the Prairie series was one we went through one year. And Little House on the Prairie, the very first book, Little House in the Big Woods, actually takes place, I think, not long after World War II ends. But we like
you mean the Civil War?
This. It's gonna. That's for that one. That's one for the bloopers. Someone clip that. Someone should clip that. Hang on, I will clip that.
You can go back up to a minute. I was actually trying to do a clip one time, and it like started lagging and wouldn't load the portion that I wanted.
Oh well. Hopefully that loads well, because I just hit the clip button. So, of the less. It starts. Little House in the Big Woods opens, I think, towards the end of the Civil War, and and like I don't always think about, you don't always connect like the frontier America with also the same America that was enslaving people, and because there was this big contrast of like the town that they shot the sheriff in, that was like a very classic like Wild West kind of looking town with like the dirt roads and the bar and the sheriff and all of the things, and then we went to these much more built up areas where there were cities and the plantations and everything that were far more populated and much more refined, and I think in my like sometimes I tend to separate like this refined look of the South that had a lot of slaves, and then the more like rustic towns that maybe not a lot of people really had slaves, or if they had one, they had maybe one because they were poorer areas, but they were still incredibly fucking racist and still had laws against like where people who were not white could and couldn't be, and so because
it was just the East and the West.
Or it was just like more rural versus more populated too.
It was the East and the West. You know why they call them Westerns?
Yes, I know.
Because they were in the West.
Yes, I know, but there were like they didn't really venture out of the Southeast, though, is what I'm saying. Like it looked like a Wild West town, but they didn't venture very far out of the Southeast. They went to like Tennessee and Mississippi and Georgia, Texas. They did go to Texas,
which is where that town was.
Which
is the Midwest.
Yes, I missed that. I missed that they were in Texas. This is not going well for me. Struggles real. Okay. Yes, they were also in Texas. I don't know why I forgot that they went to Texas, but no.
But they did spend a lot of time in the Southeast where the plantations were.
Yes, yeah, but Texas, would be part of the Wild West.
I think it's just because it was part of the kind of like set up, like they got the three guys, and it was like, okay, we're going up into the mountains, and then they like went up into the mountains and did some stuff, and it was like, and then when they were done in the mountains, they came down, and it just kind of like does a time skip right there.
Yeah, I think which is how I missed it. So they were also in Texas, which at the time, was the Wild West. They also went in the mountains, which was so cool.
Also the West.
Yes, also the West. And the really gorgeous mountains. There was like one scene where they're coming down from the mountain, and you see like the whole backdrop of the mountain range behind them, which as a child of the mountains I just love. So
you know what I didn't get about that part though?
What?
When he makes the deal with Django and he says like, how about this? You work with me until the snow melts, and then we will go and like find Brumhilda.
Yeah.
So then he kind of paints it in a way that like, oh, we don't want to go like during the winter because it's it's like cold and stuff.
Yeah.
And then they go into the mountains for the winter.
Yeah.
Where it's colder.
Right. But because that was when they were going to like find all the bounties, because they were probably what the purpose was the bounties were easier to find at that time because they weren't as active. That could be,
they couldn't really run around.
Yeah, and they were sticking to like their kind of homesteads or wherever they were because the things that they did were really only active in like the spring and the summer.
Yeah.
So
that's a good point.
Yeah, but
that was just kind of a thing. It's like, hey, when the snow melts, we'll go find her. It's like, okay. And then they went into the mountains for the whole winter, and it's like,
yeah,
okay.
like, what is the purpose here? And I think also just the mountains are also less populated, so it was probably easier for them to kind of just do what they were doing. And also for the doctor to, like, help Django and teach him and train him and all of those things.
Yeah,
Like, I love the montage where he's learning to shoot.
In the snowman.
Yeah. It's just like they keep building snowmen for them to shoot. But yeah, so what are your final thoughts, I think, on this movie?
I think it's good. It's relatively modern, which honestly, I think it did surprisingly well are you familiar with the, like, pop culture cycle?
Vaguely.
With, like, the concept of it?
I am, yeah, but why don't you talk
so,
about it?
like, with the cycle of pop culture, just kind of the major phases of what is really popular with the people at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And those Westerns are not really in style right now.
Mm-hmm.
Or also, I don't know how old this movie is, but it's not.
It came
it's
out
not
10 years
super
ago.
old.
Let me check.
Like, we still weren't really. The Western phase was
Yeah.
more like 20 to 30 years ago.
Yeah, it came out in 2012, which I do remember
so
when
10 years ago.
when it came out and hearing from people like, oh, like, that's weird that there's a Western coming out, like that's those aren't really popular right now. And I remember hearing about this movie and being told, like, oh yeah, it's not that great, it's very, like, campy, it's like a Western-y kind of thing. And so going into this movie, I had no idea what to expect because I had heard things about it and I just heard that it was just, like, not even that great. And so to, like, hear, which now thinking about the people that, like, told me that it wasn't that great, like, that actually explained, like,
it makes a lot of sense now, doesn't
makes
it?
makes a lot of sense, like, especially concerning, like, the whole discussion that we just had about this movie. So, like, now it makes sense, but I remember them being told, like, it's like a Western, it's really, like, they didn't enjoy it, but it makes sense.
It was kind of out of cycle time, which also is what made it stand out. But I think they still did it well, made it more of an action movie than, I guess they made it the type of action movie that was somewhat popular at the time. I think that was also, that was, like, during the Pirates phase, right? That was, like, around the Pirates phase time, right?
So the Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides, which was the fourth one, came out the year before, and that was a really big movie. Was actually one that I very much looked forward to that one. I was, like, in theaters for that one.
It was like pirate. So that's, like, back to the cycle. It was
of, like, the action-y, pirate-y kind of movies.
Well, just like what's popular. Like,
Right.
I think that was, especially after the first Pirates had come out, it was kind of like the next several years put us into a Pirates phase. And then, so it was like, there was, like, the Western phase, like the sci-fi phase, and like a little bit of a Pirates phase, and kind of some other stuff, kind of just a general action-y movie. And then I think after that, there may have been something else in there too, but there was a zombie phase for a while around that time too.
Yes. I
and
really hated the
zombie
phase.
thing is still kind of a thing. Like, they still do zombie things.
Yeah.
Like, The Walking Dead is, like,
still happening.
Still, like, kind of around, which is really confusing. And then we kind of went into the superhero phase, and I think we're still pretty solidly in it.
I feel like we're still in the superhero phase.
But I think that's not going to be true for a lot longer. I think we're kind of going back into maybe another sci-fi phase. I'm not really sure.
We're definitely moving
there
out
were
of the
a
superhero
lot
phase, though.
of, I guess it has been a little bit for some of the space movies, but there were a lot of, like, sci-fi space movies lately. In the past few years.
Like space explorations.
Yeah,
it'll be interesting to see kind of what really starts.
Kind of right now we're in the remake of the classics phase.
Yes, which
it doesn't really matter what it is.
We're in the remakes phase. I think that's the really big one. That, like, we're really leaning into nostalgia right now.
Yeah, we're in the nostalgia phase.
Which I have thoughts about that, which is not what we're here for. I have opinions. Andrew's heard the rant. I don't know how I feel about the nostalgia phase. I think it's already been overdone. It hasn't even been around for very long.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but but sorry, anything, what, to let you wrap up your point there. It was
pretty much it.
okay.
I think it was very well, and it was done well and did well, considering that it was kind of not the popular thing at the time.
Yeah. And I think, like, that, between that and just, like, the utter boldness of this movie, the way that Tarantino does this, where he does a movie about a freed slave that is both, like, campy and heavy, and he does it so incredibly well. And I know I have seen other Tarantino movies, and I'm not thinking of them off the top of my head, and now I'm just gonna, like, check myself here. So I have seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. That was one we watched at Christmas. And
man, there's so many.
There's so many of these, and I know.
So many of these are so.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen any of these besides now Django Unchained and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It's just. Like, so people talk about, like, classic Tarantino, and I'm like, yeah, okay. Like, I know some of these words, and so it's, so for my second Tarantino, I think it's a very good movie, and I really appreciate the way that he does not shy away from the heavy and hard-hitting things, and especially because of just how difficult it must have been to film this movie, and even, like, again, reading about it earlier today, and seeing that, like, this movie, one version of this movie was a much more aggressive and much grittier and really just, like, violent version, like, and this is already a pretty violent movie, and realizing, like, he could have done so much more, and he chose to hold back a little bit to make it a little more palatable for audiences, which even still, like, for some audiences it's not going to be palatable because it's so heavy and it's so bloody, and it's just like, even in those, like we were kind of touching on before, even in those, like, moments where, like, they're kind of campy, kind of funny, you're still like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. But also just, like, that victory of when Django rides away with Broomhilda, like, and I love at the very end where he gets to, he kneecaps the Stephen, and then he lights the dynamite, and he walks out, and at first I thought it was going to be one of those, like, walking away from an explosion scenes, but he walks out and he gets just far enough away that he's not in the blast zone.
And then he looks at it.
Yeah, he looks at it, he puts on his sunglasses, and they're, like, kind of crooked, and
then he blows cigarette smoke out, and it comes up behind his glasses.
Yes, yeah, and it, like, just flushes out behind his glasses, and he's just, you see this grin on his face as he's watching the plantation explode, and, like, Candyland go to smithereens, and, like, this, you feel his satisfaction, and then to see him riding away with Broomhilda, and he, like, comes up to her and he says, "Hey, little troublemaker," and she says, "Hey, big troublemaker," and, like, they smile at each other, and he gets on that horse and he rides away
and then the
with
rest
his
of
wife.
the movie is cheesy because he also does a little pony dance.
Yes, and it's so cute. It's so fucking cute. And it just, and, like, I just love, like, it's just, like, that sweet, satisfying victory that is so hard won. And then there's also, like, this bit of, like, that there were so many men and women who were enslaved in that time that wanted that to be their story and wanted that to be how their story ended, and that is not how their story ended. And so there's kind of a bittersweetness in that ending too. There were people that got that kind of ending, maybe not exploding the plantation and that kind of satisfaction, but they got the ending where they got away. But so few people did not. And so I think there's also just, like, that heartbreak in there too, that this is a story that feels unrealistic because it's so incredibly rare. And yeah, so just truly a phenomenal movie. I think in the last week of Black History Month, definitely one to watch. I know I mentioned this book a few times, but also if anyone wants a book recommendation, to help them reflect more on like the repercussions of the things that happen in this movie and the themes that we see in this movie. The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson is definitely one that I would recommend, and I'll put some links to that in the Discord. I know the link bots were not working today, so let me just throw these out here. So we've got the Discord, which is the Lore Masters Archives, which is again like our pretty like, if you want to know the most up-to-date schedule and like announcements and everything, that's where you want to go. Like last week we had to cancel a stream last minute, and that was where I was able to share that information. Also, if you want to catch us offline, we have, some social media. I think that was, okay. Yeah, so TikTok and Instagram are the kind of the two places. We do have Twitter that I like use never.
Don't use Twitter.
I don't use Twitter. Twitter is bad. And so we've got TikTok and Instagram there if you want to follow us there. I try to remember to post schedules on Instagram, and TikTok is always a bunch of fun with just a lot of goofy shit that we like to do, and we will be doing a full official Reed introduction as a lore master on TikTok. So he filmed his intro video this afternoon, so
soon TM when I figure out the answers to
the questions,
life, the universe, and everything.
Yes, yeah. So, thank you so much to everyone who joined us today. I hope you enjoyed this new format for Movie Mondays. I think it works out really well. It definitely makes for a shorter stream, but I think that's okay too. And I look forward to seeing you all.
Also open to modification.
Yeah.
Subject to change.
Subject to change. Mondays are kind of being workshopped right now. We're figuring it out. But I appreciate everyone who comes and supports every week as we figure out our shit. So. I definitely hope you will join Andrew and I on Wednesday at 5 p.m. Pacific. We are going to continue Tales from the Deep, continue working on the very cool underwater adventure story that we are writing, and it's going to be great. So, thank you so much for joining us, and I will see you with Andrew on Wednesday. Bye.
Bye.